Thank you for convening this roundtable and focusing on the rising costs that Americans are having to pay and how it affects them and their households and affects our economy overall. I'm so glad to be joined by our colleague, Senator Ben Ray Lujan from New Mexico, who is a great member of the Commerce Committee and fights on many of these issues, but particularly on broadband affordability. This is a subject we could spend all day here just picking the subject. Why the Republican policies have made broadband more expensive. We could talk about PBMs, about how they don't want to rein in the bad practices of PBMs. We could talk about fuel costs and how they don't want to properly police fuel markets. We could talk about, and one of my favorite issues of late is how much the larger monopolies are putting more and more sports content behind paywalls, literally making it harder for Americans to just access what their regional, local team was doing and playing, and obviously undermining the very flow of revenue that local journalism depends on that helps us create perfect information. So by ignoring these things, the Republicans, basically, as my colleague Senator Schumer just said, don't want to police the markets. And the Commerce Committee, we try very hard to pass legislation that does just that. And in addition, they try to neuter the very agencies that also are responsible for policing the markets. But because we have so many people here from rural America, I want to talk specifically about our nation's food supply and about the family farm, how consolidation and reduced competition in farming and in the grocery business leads directly to higher prices for consumers. This is important, I believe, because competition is vital to keeping prices affordable for consumers, and American farmers and ranchers are under extreme financial strain. The average farm operating loan size increased by 30% in 2025, and USDA estimates that farm debt will rise to a record of more than $620 billion in 2026. So right there, we should just grasp, if we want to try to make food more affordable, the fact that we have less and less people providing it is a real issue. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end just there. The Farm Bureau recently reported that over 300 farms filed for bankruptcy in 2025. That is a 46% increase compared to 2024. And this doesn't account for farm operations that did not qualify for bankruptcy. Many farms don't even declare bankruptcy. They make the tough decisions to sell the land, limit production, or close farming altogether. Why is this happening? Because the costs are rising and markets are closing. Costs are rising, and if you don't do anything to police the big meat packing places that rise the cost of beef by having a monopoly, if you don't do anything to talk about the options to open in markets, the cost of tariffs, one of the largest input for farmers is fertilizer. 4 companies control 61% of nitrogen, 75% of phosphate, 82% of potash markets, meaning just 4 companies dominate the U.S. fertilizer supply market. Wheat growers from my state have told me they faced an estimated excess of $40 to $100 million annually from these fertilizer prices. Farmers do not have the margins to buy new equipment, so they face higher costs and keep aging equipment running. Cash rents and farm values are at a record high as a result. Interest expenses are expected to reach a record $33 billion in 2026, so these people are getting hit every which way. All of this on top of a trade war, shutting down and threatening export markets. I hear from producers of my state, which is a big ag state, and the big exporters like markets like China and even British Columbia for potatoes are essentially gone. And now what's happening, which I don't think most people realize, is the world of competition has changed. You know, it used to be we could compete in these Asia markets, but now what's happened is China and India, I just met with the potato growers yesterday, China and India are now in the potato business, and guess where they're going? They're going to Vietnam and to Colombia and Singapore, and the competition from them is growing, all while President Trump is taking us and putting us on the sidelines. So this is unsustainable. Family farms cannot experience significant cost increase to their operations and at the same time lose some of their best customers. That is why we have seen 3,700 farms close in the state of Washington from 2017 to 2022, and more than 2 farms per day. That's more than 2 farms per day. Nationally, 140,000 farms were lost during the same period. An estimated 20,000 farms shut down over the last 2 years. So we have to do more. I want to say, though, that consolidation also affects the food industry. In groceries, the FTC studied grocery mergers in 2012 and found that mergers do not lower grocery prices. And as a result, you're paying higher prices if you are the consumer. In Washington state, the proposed grocery merger between Alberts and Kroger's would have raised grocery prices for consumers by 5% in Albertsons stores and 8% in Kroger stores. This would have resulted in my state consumers paying around $800 million more in higher grocery prices. Thankfully, the merger was blocked by the Washington Attorney General and the FTC. And I will note that in all of this information, the Kroger people even admitted, yes, we've raised these prices and we kept them high. Why? Because we could. It was just astounding. This is why we need a strong antitrust enforcer at the FTC to protect our markets from unlawful mergers and monopolies that drive up prices for consumers, including farmers. And I'm glad to see that antitrust and consumer experts, labor leaders, farm cattle ranchers, and others are speaking about this, but it just barely scratches the surface. We live in this information age and people are taking advantage. It's time for our Republican Senate colleagues to stand up and do something about this. You can take the president for whatever. He doesn't care. But now it's time to find out whether our Republican colleagues care about these farm communities that they represent. And I obviously want to continue to fight to get refunds for tariffs for the manufacturers that also impact consumer pricing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.